The morning felt calm at the airport, the kind of calm that comes before a long trip. The young boy stood beside his mother at the gate, holding a small booklet she had made for him. It was filled with notes, reminders, and little drawings she sketched the night before. She wanted to make sure he felt safe, even though this was his first time flying alone. He nodded at everything she told him, even though his stomach twisted with a mix of nerves and excitement. The gate agent announced early boarding for children flying alone. His mother gave him a long hug, the kind that felt warm and strong enough to last the whole trip. She kept her voice steady while reminding him to speak clearly, stay polite, and show his boarding pass if anyone asked. He promised he would. With one last squeeze of her hand, he walked forward, guided by the gate agent. Inside the plane, everything felt bigger than he imagined. The seats towered over him, and the overhead lights made the cabin look brighter than the airport. The flight attendant at the door gave him a short smile, but she seemed rushed and distracted. He thanked her quietly and followed the direction the gate agent had pointed him toward. When he reached his row, he double-checked the numbers to make sure he wasn't making any mistakes. His seat was next to the window. It made him feel slightly better. Windows made things easier. He could look out at clouds instead of staring at strangers' shoes. He settled in and placed his booklet on his lap. A couple of passengers walked past with heavy carry-ons, brushing the seat backs and sending soft thumps through the row. The boy kept to himself, carefully tucking his small backpack under the seat ahead of him, just like his mother told him. A few minutes later, the same flight attendant who greeted him walked down the aisle. She paused when she saw him sitting there. Her expression tightened, not in anger exactly, but in a kind of suspicion he didn't understand. She asked him where his parents were. He explained politely that he was flying alone and that the gate agent told him to take this seat. She asked for his boarding pass. He handed it to her immediately. She glanced at it, then at him, then at the seat number. But something about her face said she didn't trust what she was seeing. Even though the paper clearly showed the correct seat and flight details, she asked him again how he got the seat. He repeated himself, still calm, still polite, just like his mother taught him. A few passengers nearby looked up, sensing tension but not understanding what was wrong. The attendant sighed, as if the boy was making her job harder. Instead of checking with the front system or the gate agent, she leaned closer and told him that this seat didn't seem right. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a tone that made the boy's chest tighten. He tried to explain again, gently pointing at the number printed on the pass. His hands trembled a little, not because he was doing anything wrong, but because he could feel something unfair shifting around him. He thought maybe he had misunderstood something. Even though a moment earlier he felt sure he had done everything right. More passengers boarded and began filling rows around him. Some gave quick glances toward the boy and the flight attendant, unsure what was happening, but sensing a small cloud of unease forming. The attendant told him she would look into it and walked away briskly. The boy sat still, staring down at the booklet on his lap. His mother had drawn a little airplane on the first page with the words, "You're stronger than you think." He traced the drawing with his finger, trying to steady himself. A few minutes passed. The boy hoped the matter was sorted, that she would return with a simple, calm explanation. Instead, she returned with an expression that looked even more doubtful. She told him the seat didn't match what she expected, and asked him again if he was sure he belonged there. The way she repeated the question made it feel like she had already decided something about him, something he didn't know how to fix. Once again, he showed the boarding pass. Once again, she didn't take the time to verify it in the system. It was easier for her to assume the boy was confused than to double-check for herself. Passengers around them began to sense the uneasiness growing. A couple seated across the aisle exchanged glances, whispering softly. One of them had seen the boy show the pass earlier and looked confused about why it was being questioned again. The boy stayed quiet, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. He didn't want to bother anyone. He didn't want to raise his voice or cause trouble. He just wanted to do what he had been told, sit in the seat he was assigned, and wait for the plane to take off. But the tension did not fade. It tightened. The attendant's voice grew firmer, sharper. She said she needed to resolve this immediately. She gave a quick nod to another crew member and stepped away again. The boy sat rigidly, staring out the window this time, but the plane was still on the ground. The engines were quiet, the jet bridge still attached, and people were still filing in. He thought about what his mother said before he boarded. If something feels confusing, stay calm, speak clearly, and don't be afraid. He tried to hold on to those words, but then something happened that pushed his worry far beyond what he expected. A voice came over the intercom asking airport security to step onto the plane for assistance with a passenger. The boy's heart dropped. Passengers around him shifted, leaning out into the aisle to see what was happening. Some murmured softly, some frowned, and a few looked outright startled. The boy sat perfectly still. Two security officers stepped into the cabin, guided by the attendant who had flagged them. She pointed toward the boy as if he had done something dangerous. He lowered his gaze, terrified, but forced himself to breathe slowly. The officer approached gently, not with anger, but with confusion. He asked the boy for his boarding pass. The boy handed it over with both hands, whispering, "Yes, sir," even though his voice trembled. The officer studied the pass, then looked at the flight attendant, and looked back at the pass. Something wasn't adding up, and it wasn't the boy. Passengers began whispering more openly now. A woman seated nearby told the officer she'd seen the boy show his boarding pass earlier, and everything looked fine to her. Another passenger added that the boy had been sitting quietly the entire time and hadn't caused any disturbance. But the flight attendant insisted there was an issue. Her explanation didn't hold much weight, but her tone suggested she believed she had done the right thing. The boy's hands gripped the edge of his, the booklet so tightly the corners bent. He wished his mother was there, not because he couldn't speak for himself, but because everything felt too big for him to handle alone. The officer asked the attendant whether the system had been checked. She hesitated, then admitted she hadn't confirmed it with the gate. Her face tightened, as if she realized the situation was slipping beyond her control. Before the officer could respond, the gate agent appeared at the entrance of the cabin, looking surprised to see security there. The agent asked what was happening. A few passengers explained at once, their voices overlapping with frustration. The gate agent frowned, walked over, and asked to see the boy's boarding pass. The officer handed it over. The agent looked at it once, then again, then let out a breath. "This is the correct seat," the agent said firmly. The flight attendant stiffened. The boy didn't move. He just felt something warm rise behind his eyes, not tears of sadness, but the overwhelming release of fear he had been holding in. The officer nodded slowly, returning the pass to the boy with a gentle smile that tried to reassure him. But the moment had already carved itself into the boy's memory, before anyone could say anything else. Another voice echoed from the front of the plane. "His mother is coming back." The gate agent had contacted her, and she was walking down the jet bridge at that very moment. The sound of footsteps coming down the jet bridge felt louder than anything in the cabin. Even passengers who were still trying to take their seats turned toward the front, sensing that something unusual was happening. The boy sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap, his booklet pressed between his palms. His heart thumped hard enough that he could hear it in his ears. He didn't know what his mother would say or how she would react, but he hoped she would not be upset with him. He had done everything exactly the way she told him to. When she stepped into the cabin, a quiet stillness moved through the rows. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't frantic. She walked with purpose, her face calm but her eyes sharp and searching. The gate agent followed behind her, still explaining what had happened, but she barely needed the details. One look at her son told her enough. She walked straight to his row, bending down so her face was level with his. She brushed his hair gently away from his forehead, the same way she always did when she wanted him to know he was safe. He didn't speak at first. He just let out a breath he had been holding since the moment the flight attendant questioned him. His mother glanced at the security officers, then at the passengers, then finally at the flight attendant, who stood a few rows behind them. Her voice remained soft, but strong. "Can someone explain why my child was approached by security on a flight he boarded correctly?" For a moment, no one answered. The security officers exchanged an uneasy look. They seemed reluctant to speak because even they could see the situation didn't make much sense. One officer finally stepped forward and spoke in a calm voice. He explained that they had been called to verify the boy's seat because the flight attendant believed there was a problem. He added that the boarding pass checked out, that everything was correct, and that there had been no wrongdoing at all. His mother nodded, listening without interrupting. She was the kind of person who didn't react without understanding every detail first. After the officer finished, she thanked him politely. Then she turned her attention to the flight attendant. The attendant seemed uncomfortable now, but not apologetic. She crossed her arms and insisted she was simply following procedure and ensuring the seating arrangement was accurate. But her explanation came out strained, as if she realized halfway through that her reasoning didn't hold up. The mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse or insult. She simply asked, "And did you check with the system before calling security on my child?" The attendant hesitated. That pause said more than words. The passengers noticed it. A few people nodded quietly to themselves. Seeing the truth in the moment, the mother asked the question again, slower this time. "Did you check with your system?" The flight attendant shook her head lightly and looked away. "I didn't have time to." "You had time to call security," the mother replied gently, but firmly. Those words hung in the air like a weight. The plane was silent for a few seconds. Even the passengers who had been distracted with overhead bins or phones paused to listen. Her son watched her, feeling a mixture of comfort and worry. He didn't want to cause trouble for anyone. He only wanted to sit in the seat he had been given and follow the rules. But now everything felt larger than him, larger than the cabin even. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke to him first, not to anyone else. Her voice softened completely. "You did nothing wrong. You understand that, right?" He nodded slowly, but his eyes were still glassy with the leftover fear. She squeezed his shoulder gently. "You handled yourself so well." The gate agent stepped forward again, apologizing quietly to the mother for the trouble. The agent explained that the boy's pass was correct from the start and that he had boarded exactly as he was supposed to. More passengers chimed in, adding their own observations. One woman said she had watched him settle in peacefully and saw no issue at all. A man nearby mentioned that the boy had shown his pass several times without hesitation. Another passenger added that the situation felt unnecessary and confusing. These voices didn't come from anger, they came from people who recognized something unfair when they saw it. They had watched a kid get treated with suspicion he didn't earn. They couldn't ignore it. The mother listened to every word. When she finally turned back to the flight attendant, her expression wasn't hostile, but it carried a strength that made it hard to look away. "My son deserves to be treated with respect," she said. "Every child does. If there was a question about his seat, you could have checked your system or asked the gate staff instead of calling officers onto the plane. You made him feel unsafe." The attendant looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. The security officers stayed quiet, clearly uncomfortable with being called for something so small. One of them gently touched the back of the seat beside him, lowering his voice as he spoke to the mother. "Ma'am, we're sorry for the stress caused. Your son is clear. We'll step off the plane now, unless you need anything else." She thanked them again, but the situation was far from over. The captain soon appeared, walking down the aisle with a calm authority. He had been informed that a misunderstanding occurred, and he wanted to know the details. When he reached the row, he greeted the mother respectfully and knelt slightly to speak at the boy's level. "Are you doing okay?" he asked. The boy nodded quietly, though his voice still felt stuck in his throat. The captain looked at the flight attendant and at the gate agent and asked for a full explanation. The attendant repeated her earlier reasoning, but it sounded weaker now, especially in front of leadership. The captain frowned slightly, not with anger, but with concern. He glanced at the passengers who had witnessed everything and listened as they explained what they had seen. After a moment, the captain spoke calmly. "This situation should have been handled differently. There are proper procedures for seat concerns, and security shouldn't have been involved for a child who followed every instruction." His tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm enough that everyone understood the weight of his words. The mother nodded in agreement. "All I want," she said softly, "is for my child to feel safe and respected. Flying alone is already a big step for him." "This shouldn't have happened," the captain agreed. He turned to the flight attendant and asked her to step aside to speak privately near the front of the aircraft. She walked away slowly, her posture stiff. The cabin watched her go in silence. The mother took her seat temporarily beside her son, even though she wasn't supposed to remain on board as he was traveling alone. She brushed her thumb gently across his knuckles. "Are you feeling a little better now?" she asked. He nodded, though the fear hadn't fully faded from his eyes. She told him a small story, one he had heard many times before. It was about the time he fell off his bike and thought he would never ride again. She reminded him how he stood back up, wiped his tears, and kept going until he felt steady again. She said that sometimes life feels unfair, but those moments don't get to decide who we are. He listened, his chest rising a little more evenly now. Her voice hit him like warmth, the kind that melts away the cold left over from fear. The captain returned after speaking with the attendant. He addressed the mother quietly, explaining that he had instructed the crew to double-check procedures and handle the situation with proper care. He apologized sincerely for the distress caused to her and her son. "It shouldn't have reached this point," he said, "and I take responsibility for ensuring it's corrected moving forward." The mother accepted the apology because she believed in acknowledging when people made efforts to make things right. But she also knew that the emotional impact on her son couldn't be undone with a simple apology. As more passengers finished boarding, the tension in the cabin slowly shifted. People continued whispering to one another, not out of anger, but because they were trying to understand how everything had escalated so quickly. A few even offered small smiles or reassuring nods to the boy, trying to let him know they were on his side. The boy's mother stood slowly, preparing to leave since she wasn't supposed to travel with him, but before she stepped into the aisle, she looked toward the front again. Something in her expression changed to quiet, deep decision forming behind her eyes. She didn't say what it was yet, but the air around her shifted. As if she was preparing for something important, the gate agent approached her before she could leave, and asked if there was anything she needed. The mother hesitated, then said she wanted to speak to the airline manager before the plane left the gate. The gate agent nodded and immediately stepped off the aircraft. To call someone from the terminal staff, the boy watched his mother with wide eyes. "Are you going to stay with me?" he whispered. "For now," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere until everything is handled the right way." She took his hand again, not to comfort him this time, but because she wanted him to feel her presence as something solid and unshakable. The passengers nearby seemed relieved she wasn't leaving yet. Minutes later, the airline manager boarded the plane. His expression was professional but serious. He greeted the mother and asked if they could speak for a moment. She nodded, and together they walked a few steps down the aisle, though she remained close enough to see her son. She explained the entire situation clearly, calmly, without raising her voice once. She laid out every detail from the moment her son was questioned, to the multiple times he showed his boarding pass, to the unnecessary call for security, to the way the situation had humiliated and frightened him. The manager listened carefully. He looked at the boy, then at the passengers who were silently watching, many nodding along with the mother's account. When she finished, the manager promised to address the matter properly and ensure a safe environment for her son. But she didn't simply accept his promise. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "I want to make sure this is handled before this plane moves an inch." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the strength of someone who wasn't used to backing down when it came to her child. The manager nodded firmly. Understanding her tone and the seriousness behind it, the boy watched quietly from his seat. Sensing that his mother was fighting for him in a way he wouldn't fully understand until he was older. Whatever she was deciding, it was only beginning. The cabin had settled into a quiet tension, the kind that made every breath feel heavier. The boy sat still in his seat, trying to make himself look smaller, like he didn't want to take up space he had rightfully been given. His mother had stepped only a few feet away with the airline manager, but even from there he could sense something shifting. It wasn't anger, she wasn't the type to lose control. It was something deeper, something steady and strong, like a river moving under the surface. The manager listened with a thoughtful expression, nodding as she explained everything again in measured detail. Every word she spoke came from a place of calm certainty. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She wasn't trying to start a scene. She was simply protecting her child the way any parent would, but with a quiet authority that made everyone around her pay attention. Passengers leaned slightly in her direction, pretending not to listen, but listening all the same. Even the captain stayed nearby, giving the mother space, but ready to step in if needed. Her son watched her face carefully. He knew her expressions better than anyone. He knew when she was worried, when she was tired, when she was amused, when she was disappointed. But this expression, the one she had now, was one he saw only rarely. It was the one she wore when she'd already made up her mind. Nothing was going to move her from her decision. The manager finished listening and folded his hands respectfully. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, and I want you to know that we take these matters seriously." Oh. She nodded. "I appreciate that. But this cannot be handled with a simple apology. My son was treated like he didn't belong before anyone even checked basic information. That isn't a small mistake." "I agree," the manager replied, "and we will address it." She looked into his eyes, steady and unwavering. "Before this flight takes off, I want to be sure every person on board understands what happened and that my son will not be treated this way again. Not today, not ever." The manager hesitated, not because he disagreed, but because he was trying to think of the right steps to take. On planes, things were complicated: procedures, schedules, regulations, but none of that mattered to the mother, not when it came to her child's safety, while the manager considered his options. The flight attendant, who had started the entire incident, remained near the front of the plane. She stood stiffly, arms crossed and eyes lowered, as though she couldn't decide whether to defend herself or disappear into the wall. She looked nothing like the confident person who had confronted the boy earlier. Now she looked unsure, maybe even afraid not of punishment, but of being held accountable. Passengers noticed her discomfort, but none of them mocked or confronted her. They simply watched, waiting to see what would unfold. The mother returned to her son for a moment, sitting down beside him again. He looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "Is everything okay?" he asked in a small voice. "Everything will be," she said softly, brushing his arm. "I'm here. You're safe." Her words wrapped around him like a blanket. He nodded and breathed a little easier. But even as she comforted him, she kept one eye on the conversations happening near the front. She could sense the manager preparing to take action, but she also knew that change never happened unless someone stood firmly for it. After a brief silence, the manager approached her once more. "I've spoken with the captain," he said. "We'd like to discuss a solution that respects your concerns." She stood and followed him a few steps without letting go of her son's hand. She wanted him to hear everything that was about to happen, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. The captain joined them. "We want your son to feel comfortable for the entire flight," he said. "Your concerns are valid. We can move him to a different seat perhaps, closer to the front so he feels safer and more supervised." But the mother shook her head. "Moving him doesn't fix the problem," she replied gently. "The problem is not where he is sitting. The problem is how he was treated for sitting in the right place." The captain looked thoughtful. "What would you like us to do?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make demands that were unreasonable. She simply said, "I want the person who caused this to be removed from the flight." The cabin fell silent again. Not because her tone was harsh, but because her words were so unexpectedly calm. The manager looked at her carefully. "You want the flight attendant removed?" "Yes," she replied. "My child cannot travel feeling watched, doubted, or singled out by someone who treated him unfairly without cause." The captain spoke carefully. "That is a serious decision. It affects the entire crew and the timing of the flight." She nodded. "And calling security on a child is serious too. I am not asking for someone to lose their job. I am asking for them to step off this flight so it can continue safely and without fear." The passengers looked at one another. No one objected. No one rolled their eyes or complained. Many quietly agreed. A few even nodded. The manager exhaled slowly. "Let me speak with the crew again." He stepped away. The captain followed him. The boy looked up at his mother, unsure what all this would mean. "Will the flight still go?" He whispered. "Yes," she said, "and you will be fine. Things like this only change when people speak up the right way." He held her hand tighter. Near the front, the manager spoke quietly with the flight attendant. She grew pale. She shook her head. She gestured toward the passengers as if trying to argue her case. But whatever she said didn't matter, not now. Not after the damage had been done and witnessed by so many. The captain returned after a long moment and nodded to the mother. "We're making arrangements." "Thank you," she said simply. The flight attendant, looking frightened and ashamed, gathered her things. She walked down the aisle, unable to meet the mother's eyes or the passengers. No one clapped. No one jeered. People simply watched her pass. The boy watched too, not out of spite, but out of confusion. He didn't understand why she didn't just check the computer. He didn't understand why she looked angry earlier and sad now. But he understood one thing. His mother had protected him. Once the attendant left the plane, the atmosphere shifted immediately. It felt lighter, less tense, more human. The manager returned to the mother. "We have a replacement coming from another gate," he explained. "It may take a few minutes, but the flight will continue without further issues." "Thank you for handling it properly," she said. "You did the right thing bringing this to our attention," he replied. "And we'll continue the review after the flight." She nodded and sat back beside her son one last time before she would have to leave the plane. She leaned in close so only he could hear her, you see. She whispered, "Doing the right thing doesn't always feel easy, but it's necessary." He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. Passengers began settling back into their seats. Conversations grew softer. A few people smiled warmly at the boy, not pitying him, but acknowledging his courage. A woman seated across the aisle leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "You were very brave." He looked down, shy. But her smile was kind. The boy finally loosened his grip on his booklet. His stomach didn't feel as tight as before. His throat didn't feel as locked. His mother's presence was still surrounding him like a shield. Even though she would soon have to leave the plane, he reached into the booklet she made for him. Inside was a small drawing she had sketched of the two of them standing together on the day he was born. Under it she had written, "You will never face the world alone." He traced the words slowly with his finger. The manager approached once more. "The replacement attendant has arrived," he said gently. "We're ready to continue boarding." The mother looked at her son and then at the manager. "May I have a moment before I leave?" "Of course." She knelt beside her child, cupping his face gently. "Listen to me," she said softly. "You did everything right today. Do not let this moment make you feel small. You showed courage even when you were scared. That's what matters." His eyes watered, but he blinked the tears back. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. He nodded. Swallowing hard. She hugged him again, longer this time, tighter. Then she stood, smoothed her clothes, and took a slow breath before walking toward the exit. But before she reached the door, she stopped, turned, and faced the manager and captain. "I want it noted," she said calmly, "that today could have been avoided. My child was calm. My child was polite. My child followed every rule. The only mistake made here was assuming he did not belong." The captain nodded solemnly. "It will be noted." "And," she added, her voice steady as stone, "I trust you'll handle the rest." "You will," the manager said. She gave one final look at her son, a look full of warmth, strength, and reassurance. Before stepping off the plane, the boy watched her disappear down the jet bridge. The image of her standing tall, etched into his memory. Even though she was no longer beside him, her strength stayed with him as the door closed. And the replacement attendant greeted the cabin with a calm smile. The boy felt something shift inside him, not fear, not shame, something much stronger, trust in himself. And in the person who had stood up for him without raising her voice once, and though he didn't know it yet. Her actions were about to change far more than just a seat number or a flight delay. They were about to change the entire direction of the day. The moment the doors closed again, the cabin felt like a different place. People were still whispering, but their whispers had changed. They were no longer guessing what happened or trying to decide who was right or wrong. Now they simply watched the boy and his mother, as if the two of them carried a calm that the rest of the flight needed. The boy sat beside his mother, quietly holding the booklet she had made for him. He kept running his thumb over the edge of one page, trying to settle the nerves still shaking through him. His mother noticed, but she didn't interrupt him. She allowed him to come down from everything at his own pace. All she did was stay beside him, close enough that he could lean on her if he needed to, across the aisle. The other flight attendant, one who had stayed quiet through the earlier confrontation, came closer. He crouched slightly so he was at eye level with the boy, not towering above him. His voice was gentle, steady. "Can I get you anything? Water? Juice? Something to help you feel better?" The boy glanced at his mother first. She nodded softly, giving him permission to speak. He cleared his throat. "Just water, please." The attendant smiled with real warmth and stood again. "Right away?" As he left, the boy leaned toward his mother. "I didn't mean for all this to happen," he whispered. She brushed a hand over his shoulder. "None of this is your fault. You followed every instruction. You were respectful. You showed your boarding pass. You did everything right." His voice trembled. "But they looked at me like I did something wrong." Her expression softened with sympathy, though her calm never broke. Sometimes people carry fear or assumptions inside them without even knowing it. But when someone treats you unfairly, that doesn't mean you caused it. That belongs to them, not to you. He nodded, though it was clear he was still trying to fully understand. He was young, but old enough to know that something about the moment felt bigger than just a misunderstanding. Old enough to know that situations like this did not happen to everyone. When the kind flight attendant returned with the water, he also brought a small packet of crackers. He placed them gently on the tray table and spoke with a sincerity that reached both mother and child. "I'm really sorry for what happened earlier. I'm glad you're both here." The mother thanked him with a calm, polite smile. The boy whispered his own thank you, and the attendant walked away, trying to make the rest of the cabin feel normal again. But the atmosphere was still different. Several passengers shifted in their seats. Glancing toward the front were the first. Attendant, the one who had wrongly accused the boy, stood stiffly with folded arms. She kept her eyes low, tapping a pen against her clipboard, pretending to check numbers so she wouldn't have to face anyone. Some passengers were not willing to let it pass quietly. Woman 2 rose back, leaned toward her seatmate. If that mother hadn't come back, who knows what would have happened? "He's just a kid." Her seatmate nodded. Good thing she came in calm. She handled it better than most people would. A man across the aisle shook his head with frustration. Imagine calling police on a child. Over nothing? The mother heard some of the comments, but she kept herself focused on her son. She was not someone who needed an audience to validate her actions. Her calm strength came from somewhere far deeper, years of learning how to stay composed in moments when the world expected her to break. She watched her son drink his water, his hands still slightly unsteady. "Do you want to talk about anything?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Okay," she whispered. "Just know I'm right here." The plane finally began taxiing, and everyone settled in. The boy rested his head lightly against her arm. His breathing began to slow, becoming more even than it had been since the flight first boarded. Halfway through the taxi, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we make our way to the runway, I want to thank you for your patience. We're a few minutes behind, but we'll still have a smooth flight today." The voice was upbeat. But anyone who had seen what happened earlier knew there was something unsaid behind the tone of choice to move forward without calling more attention to the scene, but the story wasn't fully closed. Not for the passengers who felt the weight of the moment, and certainly not for the boy's mother. When the plane lifted into the air, the boy looked out the window, his eyes wide as the city shrank below them. For a brief second, the wonder of flying replaced everything else. His mother smiled softly at the sight. "Is it what you imagined?" He took a moment before answering. "Kind of, but I didn't know it would. Start like this." She rested her hand lightly over his. "Sometimes the beginning of a journey is rough. What matters is how you finish it." He tried to smile back, and she could see he was trying with all the strength he had. A few minutes later, the same attendant from earlier returned once more. He seemed hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether he should bring something up, then decided to do it anyway. "There's something I want to let you know," he said carefully. "When we land, there will be a report filed about what happened. The captain wants to speak to you afterward, if that's all right." The mother nodded. "I understand.
Yeah.
I just want you to know," he continued gently, "the crew, well, most of us, we're grateful you stepped in the way you did. The boy shouldn't have gone through that." She breathed slowly, absorbing his words. "Thank you for saying that." He gave the boy a small nod of encouragement before stepping away. For a while the flight became peaceful. The boy watched clouds drifting below the plane and let his imagination distract him from everything else. His mother reached over and adjusted his seatbelt, making sure he was comfortable. But some passengers still looked uneasy. A man from the first row finally pressed the call button. When the first attendant approached, he didn't lower his voice. "What you did earlier was wrong," he said plainly. "That child showed you his pass." Her shoulders stiffened. "Sir, I followed protocol." "No," he interrupted. "You followed your assumptions." She blinked, taken off guard. "You don't know what I was thinking? Everyone knows what they saw," he replied firmly, "and you almost caused something that could have gone very badly." Other passengers nodded. The attendant didn't respond. She simply walked away with her mouth pressed into a tight line. The boy watched the interaction, his eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and concern. His mother spoke softly so that only he could hear. "You don't have to carry the weight of other people's mistakes." He lowered his gaze. "I know. You're not the reason anything went wrong," she continued. "You're the reason things were made right." He looked up slowly, surprised by her words. "You stayed calm. You told the truth," she reminded him. "You trusted yourself even when someone else didn't." Let out a shaky breath. "I tried, and you did well." A tear he didn't expect formed in the corner of his eye. He brushed it away quickly, embarrassed, but his mother hugged him gently, making it clear there was nothing to be embarrassed about. As the flight went on, the mood slowly shifted from tension to reflection. People kept replaying the moment in their minds, thinking of the child and their own family, wondering how they would have reacted if placed in the same situation. Some passengers felt angry. Some felt protective. Some felt inspired by the way the mother held her ground without raising her voice. Near the end of the flight, the second attendant came back one last time. "If either of you need anything else, please let me know." The mother smiled in appreciation. "We're all right. Thank you." He turned to the boy. "You did great today, really." The boy nodded shyly, the compliment sinking into him with a warmth he didn't expect as the plane started its descent. The mother straightened his collar and smoothed the wrinkles on his shirt. She wanted him to step off the plane feeling strong, not shaken. "Are you ready for the landing?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah." The wheels touched the ground with a soft bounce, and the cabin exhaled as one. The boy looked out the window again as the runway rushed past, the world growing larger outside while something inside him grew steadier. He didn't know what would happen once they stepped out, what the captain wanted to say, or how the situation would be handled, but he trusted that his mother would be beside him through all of it, and for the first time since boarding, he felt prepared. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, the mother and child remained seated. Passengers filed past them, some offering small smiles, some giving supportive nods. One woman paused and quietly said, "You're a brave young man." The boy swallowed. "Thank you." His mother squeezed his hand. Finally, when the aisle cleared, the kind attendant approached again. "The captain is waiting just outside the cockpit," he said gently. "Take your time." The boy stood, his legs steadier than before. He took a deep breath, then looked up at his mother. "Let's go," he said, and together they walked toward whatever was waiting next. The boy stepped forward slowly, still holding his mother's hand. Even though the plane had already emptied, the air near the front felt heavier than the rest of the cabin. The light from the open cockpit door spilled gently into the aisle, giving the space a soft glow. The captain stood waiting, tall and calm, his hat tucked under one arm as a sign of respect rather than authority. His face carried the look of someone who had seen many situations over the years, but still knew when something required a personal touch. "Thank you for staying back," he said quietly addressing the mother first. "I wanted to speak with you both before you left." The mother nodded politely, her tone steady as always. "Of course." The captain crouched slightly, so he was eye level with the boy. "You had a difficult experience today," he said gently. "But I want you to know something important. You did nothing wrong. You followed every instruction. You were patient. And you were polite." The boy shifted slightly, trying to absorb the words. "I tried, and you succeeded," the captain replied. "That's why I wanted to talk to you before you left this plane." He glanced briefly at the first attendant, the one who had called security. She stood near the galley, her face tight, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't try to speak. She didn't try to defend herself. She simply waited, as if she knew this moment no longer belonged to her. The captain cleared his throat softly before continuing. "When you were stopped at the door?" "It wasn't because of anything you did," he explained. "Sometimes people make decisions based on fear instead of facts. Sometimes they react too quickly. And sometimes they judge before understanding. But those choices are not your responsibility." The boy looked to his mother again. She nodded gently, silently encouraging him to listen. "But here's what is important," the captain said. "When someone treats you unfairly, it doesn't change your worth. It doesn't change your right to be here. It doesn't change who you are." The boy felt the words settle inside him slowly, but deeply, like pebbles sinking to the bottom of a calm lake. He didn't fully understand everything, but he understood enough. The mother spoke softly, her voice firm but respectful. "I appreciate you taking the time to say this." "Many people don't," the captain nodded, looking at her with a kind of quiet admiration. "You handled the situation with remarkable patience. And your son? He showed strength beyond his years." He then turned to the attendant who had caused the trouble earlier. Her posture straightened, as if she had been expecting this part. The captain's expression didn't shift into anger, but it did become serious. "I've already documented what happened," he told her, "and there will be further review once we're off the aircraft." She swallowed hard. "I understand." His tone softened only slightly. "A child deserves care, not fear." She lowered her eyes, unable to argue. The second attendant, the one who had been kind and consistent, stood behind the captain, offering a small encouraging smile to the boy. He had been helpful throughout the flight, but now he seemed determined to be a steady presence until the very end. "Is there anything you'd like to say before you go?" the captain asked the mother. She paused for a moment, then spoke with measured clarity. "Just one thing. I don't need apologies. I don't need anything undone. I just want to be sure my son learns the right message from today." The captain nodded. "And what message is that?" "That even when someone doubts you," she said gently, "you don't have to doubt yourself. And you never let someone else's fear decide where you belong." The captain took in her words with a slow breath. "That's a lesson everyone on this plane should take with them today." Then he extended a hand to the boy. "I hope you'll fly again," he said kindly. The boy hesitated for only a second before shaking his hand. "I will." His mother smiled softly at that. She placed her hand on his back, guiding him gently toward the exit. The second attendant stepped aside for them, nodding respectfully. As mother and son walked out of the plane, the gate area outside felt strangely quiet. Passengers who had been talking earlier now simply watched them pass. There was no commotion, no anger, no raised voices, just a quiet understanding in the air, like everyone recognized they had witnessed something that would stay with them. A few people offered soft smiles. One couple even whispered. He handled that better than most adults would. The boy heard them, but pretended he didn't. He stayed close to his mother as they walked toward the escalators. It was only when they reached a less crowded hallway that he finally spoke. "Mom." "Yes, did. Did I make everything worse?" She stopped walking so she could kneel to his eye level. She placed a hand on each of his shoulders. "You made nothing worse," she said gently. "You handled yourself better than many grown-ups do in moments like that. You stayed calm. You stayed respectful. That takes strength." He looked down at his feet. "I was scared. And you still did the right thing," she said. "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are." He let the words sit with him for a moment. Then he finally asked the question that had been sitting in his heart the whole time. Why did she think I didn't belong? The mother took a quiet breath. She knew he deserved the truth, but she also knew he deserved gentleness. Sometimes people make quick judgments. Sometimes they see someone and think they already know their story. They forget to ask. They forget to check. They forget to treat people with fairness. He bit his lip. But she didn't forget what the other kids. Her eyes softened. You're right. And that's why what happened wasn't fair. But unfair moments don't define who you are. They reveal who other people are. He lifted his eyes to hers. Who am I? Her voice grew warm, steady, full of love. You're someone who handled a difficult day with kindness and courage. You're someone who stayed polite even when you were shaken. You're someone who didn't let someone else's mistake take away your honesty. A small, real smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She returned it with an even softer one. Come on, she said, standing again and taking his hand. Let's get your bag. They walked to the baggage claim area, which buzzed with life wheels rolling, voices echoing, children running. For a moment, it felt like the world outside the plane had kept moving the whole time. Unaware of the storm they had just walked through, as they waited for his suitcase, the boy stood a little taller. He still held his mother's hand, but not in the same nervous way as before. It wasn't fear now, it was reassurance, connection that strengthened instead of holding him up. When his bag finally slid down the belt, he grabbed it with both hands and lifted it easily. Got it. His voice sounded lighter, stronger. They walked toward the exit doors, where cool outside air swept into the terminal each time someone stepped through. The boy breathed it in deeply like he was starting over. Before they left the building, he tugged gently on his mother's hand. Mom? She looked down at him. Yes. Can I fly alone again someday? He asked, her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in pride. Do you want to? He nodded. Yeah, but only if you trust me. Her smile grew warm, wrapping him like the hug from earlier that morning. I've always trusted you, she said, and I always will. He squeezed her hand. Then I want to try again. Not today, but someday. She brushed a hand over his hair. And when you do, you'll walk onto that plane remembering that you belong anywhere you choose to be. They stepped through the sliding doors and into the sunlight outside. Cars rolled past, people hurried in and out, and life moved forward again. The boy lifted his face toward the warm brightness, letting it wash over him like a gentle promise. He didn't feel small anymore. He didn't feel uncertain. He didn't even feel shaken. He felt ready to go. Forward, ready to grow stronger, ready to believe. In himself the way his mother believed in him, they walked together. Toward the car park, their steps steady, their hands joined, their hearts lighter than they had been when the day began. The world had tested him, but he had walked through it with truth, with calm, with courage, and as they left the airport behind, the boy knew something deep and new inside himself. He would never let someone else's doubt decide his worth again.